Everybody doing tonight? Oh, there I am. Hello. For me? Surely that's all for me, not for this amazing event you're about to witness. Hi, everyone. My name is Aidan Flax Clark, and I work here at the library, and I'm here to quickly introduce tonight's event and bring up our main speaker, Peter Kuper, who's going to tell you all about his incredible exhibit and tonight's speakers and so much more. I just wanted to say hello to everyone in the room, hello to everyone who's watching online, and to let you know that we very much encourage you to wear masks tonight. We don't require it, but given everything that's going on, we very much encourage it, so thank you if you are. And I also wanted to let you know, whether you are here in the room or you're watching online, you can ask questions for all of tonight's speakers. If you're here in the room, hopefully you saw that there are note cards on the chairs, and some colleagues of mine will be walking around during the program picking them up, so write your question down anytime, and I highly encourage it to be a question. And if you can, make it legible. Last night I got some cards that I was like, I would like to ask this question, but I don't know what any of the words are. So, if you're watching online, you can put your question in the chat, or you can email publicprograms@nypl.org, and we've got someone monitoring both of those, and we'll get them, and we'll put them on note cards and pass them up to the speakers. So please, whether you're in the room or you're online, we really would like to hear from you. Lastly, I just want to say that Live from NYPL is made possible by the continuing generosity of Celeste Bartos, Manaz Isfahani Bartos, and Adam Bartos, and of course by all of you friends here in the room, online. Thank you so much for your support, and thank you very much for being here with us tonight. And let's get to it. Let's bring up Peter.
Hello. So welcome, and thanks to all of you for braving the elements to join us here tonight. And a million thanks to the NYPL and the many people who worked to make this night and exhibition possible. Oh, there we go. Thank you. And Charlie Carter in particular. Actually, all of you are similar to the other animals that we'll be exploring tonight. You've flown or tunneled or bridged your way to be here, crossed dangerous motorways, faced many other challenges in this concrete jungle. Why, you've even encountered lions in order to cross the library's threshold. So congratulations on surviving your ordeal. Now, let me start by telling you a little bit about myself, or at least what I'm not. I'm not an evolutionary biologist, an entomologist with a PhD, or an associate curator at the American Museum of Natural History. I'm certainly not the current president of the Entomological Society of America or co-founder of Entopoc, that encourages people of color to explore the study of insects to help diversity in entomology, like tonight's next speaker. Whoops, pardon me. Well, there's Jessica and Elena. I'm also not, I have not earned a PhD in ecology or a bachelor's degree in biology. I'm no expert in nocturnal hawk moths. I've never worked as an environmental educator for the New Jersey Audubon Society. For those things, we'll turn to our third speaker, Elena Tartaglia, who co-founded National Moth Week, now in its 11th year. It'll land on July 23rd to the 31st, so please mark your calendars. In 2017, I can't remember exactly what I was doing. I was probably fretting over who was in the White House. But that's certainly, I wasn't founding Brooklyn Bugs with a mission to raise awareness and appreciation for edible insects. Entomophagy. That may be the solution to world hunger. I'm most definitely not a brilliant chef, and I sadly will never be the culinary director for the future of food at South by Southwest. For that, we'll have to rely on our final speaker, Chef Joseph Yoon. So who am I? I'm so glad you asked. I'm a citizen scientist with no degrees, with a lifelong fascination for the beauty and wonder of these amazing creatures. Insects were, in fact, my first passion. I highly recommend Passion to everyone. My parents got me this book when I was 4. And I just love them to death. I'm sorry about the death part. There are so many different kinds of insects to love. By some estimates, 10 quintillion. That's 10 with 18 zeros after it. This means each one of us could have 200 million to personally love. When biologist J.B.S. Haldane was asked by a church leader, what could be concluded about God from the study of nature? Haldane replied, he had an inordinate fondness for beetles. I have no idea if that's his accent, but that's the one I'm doing. You know, and it's funny, actually, many people have asked me, which is my favorite beetle? And I'd have to say Ringo, because I just dig his hairstyle. Now, I'm aware that not everyone shares an enthusiasm for the fab 10 quintillion, but I'm hoping tonight we can create a new level of appreciation for at least some of them. So, I might have grown up to be an entomologist, but when I walked into my local drugstore and I saw the king of insects, Grottu, followed by Krang, who you will never ever forget, and especially Spider-Man, who you will never ever avoid. My passion turned to comic books. As I made a career as a cartoonist, I discovered I didn't just have to settle for one passion. I found a hybrid, a place where arthropods and this Homo sapien could intersect by drawing them in pictures, cartoons, and long-form graphic novels that didn't require spandex or superpowers. In 2020, the New York Public Library gave me a unique opportunity to explore this hybrid with their 9-month Cullman Fellowship, providing an office right next door, in fact, on the second floor, with access to the library's treasure trove of art and literature. As I investigated both the history of insects and some of the brilliant artists, naturalists, and entomologists who studied them through the centuries, I happily discovered solid evidence that we humans, even with all our failings, are not complete idiots. But in 2020, with the pandemic raging, there was something missing from the public library. The public. Like it might be a post-apocalypse. The library spaces were devoid of humans. Though wandering the empty halls, I started to see this apocalypse as inspiration. Without the hive of human activity, my focus expanded to the library itself, the physical structure and its stunning architectural details. And I found ways to populate the space. And the library became the framing device for my entire book. Insects have, after all, survived extinction in one form or another for over 400 million years. Though currently they are more challenged than any time in their vast history. Exploring the story of arthropods and their intersection with people has revealed just how miraculous this association has been and how much more we have yet to learn about them. As far back as Aristotle, we've been trying to figure out what makes bugs tick. Aristotle, based on his observation of bees and no doubt sexism, presumed that the head of the hive was a king bee. It wasn't until the 1600s that Jan Swammerdam's dissections proved otherwise. Swammerdam also determined all worker bees are females. Males are just there for the sex, then au revoir. Ants, by the way, are also a matriarchal society. In the early 20th century, another leap forward in our understanding of insects was made by Charles Henry Turner, an American zoologist, educator, and comparative psychologist. Among Turner's pioneering discoveries on animal behavior and cognition, he found that ants, to quote him, are much more than mere reflex machines. They are self-acting creatures guided by memories of past individual experiences. One of his experiments that provided the conclusion is now known in the field as Turner's circling. He also performed Pavlovian experiments on moths that determined the ability to hear and remember. and his experiments with bees demonstrated their ability to see patterns and color. Unfortunately, Turner also determined that most humans only saw color, and with limited employment options, ended up teaching in a segregated high school in St. Louis. Nonetheless, he continued to conduct his experiments and published a remarkable 41 papers in his 56 years. Simultaneous to Turner, in Austria, Karl von Frisch was studying bee cognition and how they communicate. He later made astounding discoveries of the information conveyed in the bee's waggle dance. This dance allows bees to communicate the location of food and sources for the rest of the hive. His work would lead to a Nobel Prize in 1973. While I'm mentioning bees and honors, my Nobel Prize has come in the form of having a new bee species named after me by entomologist Michael S. Engel, who can be heard through the magic of QR codes, discussing bees both in the exhibition upstairs and on the library's website. Another remarkable insect who clearly has a tremendous press agent is the monarch butterfly. Though this migration has gone on for thousands of years, North Americans have only found out exactly where they migrate in 1975. Given their many years in Mexico, I'm guessing they would have picked up some Spanish. Exactly what guides them on their 3,000-mile journey from Canada to a specific forest in Mexico is still being researched, but it has been determined that they travel 50 to 100 miles a day on their 2-month migration, facing even greater environmental challenges than all of you faced to be here tonight. I had the great fortune to visit the sanctuaries with my wife back in 2007, and daughter. Really, drawing can't do justice to the experience of being in the proximity to millions of monarchs. They fill the pine trees and cause the branches to sag from their weight. They brush past your face and cast shadows on the ground, giving the appearance of a rushing river. Though admittedly, it wouldn't have been as charming had these been, say, wasps or Wizard of Oz flying monkeys. Short of a visit, I recommend YouTube. Another giant in the field of entomology was Maria Sabila Marion. Though she began by studying and drawing flowers, her focus shifts towards the creatures that pollinate them. In 1699, at the age of 52, Marion self-financed a voyage to the Dutch colony of Suriname, which, by the way, was traded from the Dutch to the English for Manhattan. Surprise. Because it was just a backwater swamp, that Manhattan. She was the first female naturalist to make the 5,000-mile journey and was accompanied by her daughter, Dorothea. She planned to spend 5 years illustrating new species of insects and plants, but their trip was cut short when it is believed Marion contracted malaria. Yes, you are. Her revelatory work helped debunk Aristotle's over 2,000-year-old conjecture that insects were spontaneously generated from mud or meat, and that each phase was a separate creature. So let me conclude by mentioning a few more unsung heroes from the insect world. Without dung beetles, we'd be up to our necks in manure. They can bury up to 0.5 ton of cow pies per acre in a year, aerate soil, and prevent pest population explosions, saving farmers $1 billion annually. They also miraculously can use the light given off by the stars of the Milky Way to guide them at night. But given the association with poop, there's always the jokes. Dung beetle walks into a bar and asks the bartender, "Is this stool taken?" Another insect that touches your life in ways you may not realize is the lac bug. It secretes a kind of resin that has paved the way for shellac records, floor sealant, the coat of many candies, and the shine on apples. And finally, cochineal. For thousands of years, it was harvested in Peru and especially Oaxaca, Mexico, one of my favorite places, for the brilliant red dye it produced. When the Spanish conquistadors laid eyes on the dye, they exported tons, and Spain made a fortune. It was more valuable than gold. It was only second to silver. And that an insect was the source of the dye stuff was Spain's closely guarded secret for the next 250 years. There was biopiracy trying to figure this out. They did everything they could over the years to figure out what was this coming from. They thought it was a seed, a grain, no idea. So they never could break the code for 250 years. It became the favored color of royalty, the red of the redcoats and the stripes on the first American flag. It's also what gave artists their rouge, including Van Gogh. And they've done tests on the paintings, like sort of a DNA test, and determined that yes, in fact, that's cochineal. And it continues to this day to be the favored coloring agent for food and cosmetics. Look for the ingredient name carmine. Now, if this hasn't convinced you to become an insect lover, or at least appreciate their value, then just think about the foods you adore that would disappear without insect pollinators. Without a wide variety of different types of bees, including wild bees, it's not just the honeybee. Say goodbye to honey. Bumblebees too. And your morning coffee. And, dear God, chocolate. Yes, chocolate. Now, can you guess the second most important pollinator after bees? Not the experts, please. Think about it. It's flies. Yes, that's right. Who help pollinate all of these things. The bottom line is, without insects, many grocery store shelves would be emptied and we would be knee-deep in, that is not chocolate. What Rachel Carson rang the warning bells about in her landmark 1962 book, Silent Spring, the overuse of pesticides continues to be an existential threat to the natural world. As insects lose their habitats and health, millions are in the process of going extinct. The sound of that alarm is the absence of nature's sound, including birds, who depend on insects as a food source. Perhaps you've seen the recent movie Don't Look Up. I'd flip that title for bugs and say, do look down. Appreciate the marvel of every kind of insect. It's really been their world, and we've only recently stepped into it. So be kind and avoid stepping on them. For more on this remarkable world of arthropods, now let me introduce Jessica Ware.
Thank you, Peter. That was a really good pitch for why we should all hopefully become entomologists before the end of the night. So I'm a curator of invertebrate zoology in the entomology department at the American Museum of Natural History. And what that means is that really I'm a field biologist. So like Peter, I like going out to explore nature. And whenever you go to the tropics, if you go to the desert, even if you go to the Arctic, one thing that is really striking that kind of stands out to you is how many insects there are. Peter quoted the number 10 quintillion insects. Sometimes that can be hard to know exactly what that means. Often when we think about it in terms of biodiversity, we think about numbers of species. And when we think about numbers of species, there are more insects than there is anything else. So we have around 1.5 million described insect species, but we think maybe there's 5 million, maybe there's 10 million. Some people even say 30 million species yet to be described. Many of these probably will go extinct before we describe them, just because there aren't enough of us out there doing the work of taxonomic descriptions. This dwarfs things that we know and love, like mammals. There's around the same number of species of dragonflies and damselflies as there are mammals. There's only a little over 6,000 mammals, and yet we spend so much time talking about conserving mammals. When we look across insect biodiversity, we notice that there's a lot of variety. You like predators? We've got predators. There's herbivores. There's parasites. There's things that live under the soil. There's things that live in fresh water. Insects have been around for a very long time, around 400 million years, and they've really evolved to fill all of the possible niche spaces that are out there. The groups that I mostly work on at the museum are Blattodea, which are cockroaches and termites. Since around 2007 or so, we've considered termites just to be fancy social cockroaches. So they're just cockroaches that have this unique behavior where they have kings and queens and workers and soldiers. I also work on Odonata, which are the dragonflies and damselflies. And when we study biodiversity, we often want to try and use phylogenies. We want to try and understand the evolutionary history of species because we want to know how things are related to each other. We want to know how old they are when things first appeared on the planet. All of these data can be really useful so that we can make predictions about what's going to happen next in a changing climate and a changing world. So what we like to do as evolutionary biologists is we like to, just as any of you who may have made a family tree using Ancestry.com, or maybe you've done 23andMe and you've kind of figured out how you're related to people, we can draw figures that are similar to this to understand how species are related to each other, and we call them phylogenies or trees. So this is a phylogeny, the tree of life, the family tree, such as it is, for all of insects. And where dragonflies and damselflies lie are right here at the base of the winged insects. So if we just kind of zoom in, these are where mayflies and dragonflies first diverged from a common ancestor. We think around 400 million years or so ago is when first things started to fly. Before birds, before bats, before pterosaurs, there was nothing in the sky. It was insects first that flew, and we think it was something that looked like a dragonfly or a damselfly. So as I mentioned, there's around the same number of species of these insects as there are mammals. We divide them into different piles. There's dragonflies, which tend to land with their wings out at the side. There's damselflies, which tend to be slender-bodied and hold their wings behind their back. And in general, they look like this as adults, and as juveniles, they develop in freshwater, and they look like this. So they eat each other as adults. They eat each other as juveniles. They also eat flies. So if you don't like mosquitoes, the best thing you could do, really, is to have a pond feature in your yard because dragonflies will eat the mosquitoes as nymphs, and they will eat the mosquitoes as adults. They also like horseflies, black flies, you name it. But they can also take vertebrates. So these tiny insects can actually also eat minnows, and they can eat tadpoles, which I think is remarkable. They're close relatives to Griffon flies. These are things that look sort of like some of the images that Peter has upstairs on the 3rd floor. Griffon flies flew in the Carboniferous period, around 350 million years ago. They had huge wingspans, so each wing was around 37 centimeters. There's a colleague from Stuttgart holding kind of a model of what the size of one of these things may have looked like. These are not modern dragonflies, so these are not modern Odonata. These are close relatives. Modern Odonata, we think, is much younger. So dragonflies and damselflies, as we know them today, have existed probably for around 250 million years or so. So along with colleagues, we can use, actually one of them who's in the second row over here, Manpreet Kohli, who's also a postdoc at the American Museum. We reconstructed a phylogeny, or a tree of life, of dragonflies and damselflies. And in doing this, we can kind of understand how dragonflies and damselflies have evolved relative to each other and the timing of these events. We don't just want to look at deep time, though. We want to try and make predictions about what's going to happen in the future. And to do that, we need to understand populations. Looking at populations is something that humans know a lot about because we're one species, and so any of the studies on humans are really looking just at populations. But for insects, we know very little about populations. So when we talk about insect decline, when we talk about biodiversity loss, one of the stumbling blocks that we have is that we really don't know how many individuals are in any population for any species of insect. There's a few that we know a lot about because they might be economically important. We know an awful lot about honeybees, for example, but we know almost nothing about the majority of dragonflies. So if somebody says, well, are dragonflies decreasing? Our usual answer is, well, we don't know, because we don't know how many dragonflies we have. We don't know how big populations are, and we can't really make assessments of change unless we get this baseline information. But we can collect dragonflies, we can collect insects around the world, we can sequence their DNA, we can monitor populations and start to gather this information for making predictions in the future. Dragonflies are actually very neat. So their wings actually develop while they're in their larval skin. You may have seen, if you've ever gone fishing or swimming, sometimes you'll see the shed skin, we call them an exuvia, of a dragonfly kind of clinging to a reed or a branch. And they basically, as adults, pull their body out of this shed skin and leave the shed skin behind. So those wings develop while they're in the fresh water. So the composition of those wings contains hydrogen from the H2O in which they developed. And hydrogen actually varies biochemically across the globe. Depending on where you are, the weight of hydrogen actually varies. So we can use this kind of biochemistry of wings to tell us whether dragonflies are moving around, which is a really neat aspect of kind of monitoring populations. So as Peter mentioned, when we look across insects, our goal is to classify what we have, document what we have, but we can't really do very much if we just do that. If we stop just writing academic papers and that's all that we do, we're probably going to lose them. So we're in a period of time where things are disappearing, right? We're losing insects at an alarming rate. Some of the recent studies suggest up to 70% of insect biomass has been lost over the time when people have been keeping records in the last 30 or 40 years. And what that tells us is that we have to act fast. And one of the ways to act is to change our perception of insects. To change our perception of insects, to go upstairs, look at insects that are larger than life, which is what Peter's created for us, and really encourage people to not look at insects as something that is a pest. Less than 2% of all insects are pests. The majority of insects are living their lives outside of the human condition, really with no interest whatsoever with interacting with humans. Our goal is to have everybody feel that same passion. Those photos that Peter showed of himself holding, moss as a child, many of us felt that kind of curiosity about the natural world. This is an insect collection that my kids made with me and my graduate students when we were in Guyana, just using an old bingo box that they had brought bingo with them to the field, and we cut some upholstery foam, made kind of some foam backing inside the box, and we were able to make this insect collection. Everybody should be able to appreciate insects, and if we're going to make a change, if we're going to save insects, we all have to be in it together. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Elena.
Well, thank you for having me tonight. So I'm here to talk to you tonight about moths at this event celebrating the intersection of insects and humans. When I give a talk about moths, I like to start with a discussion about how moths have gotten kind of a negative image to the public and how the media is partially to blame for that. So a couple of examples. First, we'll start with this movie. It's getting to be a little bit of an old movie now, but it does prominently feature a moth in the storyline. This is the Death's Head hawk moth, and it really does look like this. It has a skull-like pattern on its thorax. And The Silence of the Lambs is widely regarded as one of the scariest movies of all time. I haven't seen it. I'm too scared. Then we have this guy. This is the Mothman, who is a cryptozoological creature said to terrorize people in West Virginia. Although it does seem that the tide is turning on the Mothman because there's an annual festival now in his honor. And we can't talk about famous moths without the OG, the original famous moth, Mothra, the enemy of Godzilla. And of course, when I tell people I work with moths, the first thing they say is, oh my God, I hate moths. They're disgusting. They eat my sweaters. That's not really fair, because of the tens of thousands of moth species on Earth, two are considered clothes moths, pests of fibers. So why are we blaming an entire taxon for the problems caused by a few, an easily avoidable and treatable problem? So moths play essential roles in ecosystems, and of course a functioning ecosystem is fundamental to the continuation of human life. So I'm just going to talk about 3 of the many, which part have been covered by our various speakers, but first we'll start with decomposition. Decomposition is important because, to put it bluntly, if we didn't have decomposition, everything that ever died would still be here, and that would be unpleasant. So, to go into a little more detail, so when a plant grows in soil, it takes nutrients out of the soil to grow its body, and then maybe an animal eats that plant and the nutrients cycle, but the only way for those nutrients to cycle back into the soil so we can maintain soil fertility is via decomposition. And moths in particular play a role in leaf litter decomposition, breaking down dead leaves. Of course, moths are food. Moths play a role in food webs. Moths are food for bats. They're food for lizards. They're food for rodents, for bears, for foxes, and of course, they're also food for birds. And in particular, caterpillars, we find, are an absolutely essential resource for ensuring nestling success in breeding birds. And so caterpillars are the main food for baby birds. And if you think about it, like, a caterpillar is a little soft sack of protein. It's perfect baby food. And of course, moths play an essential role in pollination along with bees and other organisms. And pollination, moving pollen from plant to plant, that's how plants reproduce and maintain genetic diversity. So without moths, we would have fewer plants, we would have fewer and maybe no birds at all, and we would have less decomposition, and none of that is a world I'm really interested in living in. So moths play roles in ecosystems, but they also directly benefit humans economically, and I'm going to give 2 examples of that, one modern and one ancient. So we'll start with our modern example. This is the fall armyworm, and this worm was instrumental in the production of a vaccine for COVID-19 by a company called Novavax, and it is still in phase 3 trials, so it's about to be approved. But researchers took cells from these moths, they grew them in bioreactors, and they used them to produce large quantities of COVID spike proteins. So this is a little different mechanism than the vaccines we got from Pfizer and Moderna, the mRNA vaccine. But the more ways to fight COVID, the better, and maybe your next booster will be courtesy of a moth. And then on to our ancient example, which is still in continuation in the modern day, and that's sericulture. That's the production of silk. So silk is produced by a couple of species of silk moth or silkworm, but the main kind of species is Bombyx moray, which you could see here. About 90% of silk is what we call mulberry silk, because that's the main food source for this moth. So when the caterpillar is ready to pupate, when it's ready to move on to the next stage of its life, it spins a cocoon made of silk. And the cocoon is really remarkable because it is a single strand of silk that can be up to 1,000 feet long. That's amazing. So to produce silk, each cocoon has to be really carefully unwound so as not to break the strand. Several strands of the silk are plied together into thread, which is what's happening in that image by hand. And then those threads are woven together and dyed to create the incredibly beautiful silk fabrics. And if you're wondering why silk is so expensive, because I've just told you it's essentially bug spit, it's because it takes about 3,000 of those cocoons, or about the size of the end of your finger, to make a single yard of silk. So that brings us to the exhibit we're here to see tonight. So this is Peter Kuper's incredible illustration of Hylophora cecropia. That's a Cecropia moth. That's one of our native silk moths. So believe it or not, here in the Northeast, we have native silk moths, although they're not the same as the ones that make fabric. So Hylophora cecropia is one of our largest species. I just included a photograph just to point out the incredible attention to detail that Peter put in. I'm just obsessed with this image. I love it. There's about 20 or so species of native silk moths here in the Northeast, and they're incredibly spectacularly beautiful. I encourage you to get out and do a moth night one of these days and see some of them. But the sad reality is that many insects, including moths and butterflies, are facing declines or risk of extinction. And while we have this negative perception of insects, the real negative in the equation is us as humans. So the major driver of biodiversity loss worldwide is habitat loss. And in particular for insects, one major form of habitat loss is this, our national obsession with maintaining a monoculture perfect lawn. Now, I know we're in New York City, but in case it wasn't obvious, I'm from Jersey, and our neighborhoods look a lot like this. So instead of fitting our homes into the ecosystem and being good stewards of our land and maintaining deciduous forests and floral resources that these organisms need, that a lot of wildlife needs, we do this. And I mean, I think the image on the right is incredibly beautiful. And a particular threat for wild silk moths is our addiction to this machine, the leaf blower. And in my neighborhood, you can hear a leaf blower every hour of every day of the year. And for wild silk moths in particular, so like their domesticated cousins, they also spin a silk cocoon. So they spend the winter as a pupa, spin a silk cocoon. They add a little leaf for extra protection. And then they spend the winter in leaf litter at the base of a tree. But what do we do with that leaf litter? We blow it away and we throw it away. And so we cause habitat loss and direct mortality to our silk moths in this way, all in the pursuit of a perfect lawn. So I just want to leave you with this quote from Doug Tallamy's book, Nature's Best Hope, which I think really sums up our cultural relationship with insects. Humans would last only a few months if insects were to disappear from Earth. It's remarkable, then, that our cultural relationship with insects is not one of awe and appreciation, but one of disgust and animosity. We've created a culture in which insects and their arthropod relatives are maligned. In the name of protecting crops and fighting a few disease vectors, we've declared war on all insects and we kill them whenever we can. We are winning our war against insects at our own peril. So the goal of tonight's event, part of the main goal, is to take that negative perception and turn it into a positive appreciation for the immeasurable good that these organisms bring to our lives. Thank you very much. Next, we're going to have Chef Joseph Yoon.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to INterSECTS. And I'm going to be talking about exploring entomophagy, or the human consumption of eating insects. Brooklyn Bugs is my company, which was founded in 2017 with a mission to normalize edible insects. We break down psychological barriers and transform perceptions in sustainability through an interdisciplinary approach rooted in outreach, education, and gastronomy. We publicly make bold statements and disrupt the status quo. We've happily resumed public speaking engagements, classes, workshops, and events again since COVID. We're so happy to be here today. And recently, we were down at South by Southwest, and I had the great honor to be a moderator for the psychology behind mainstreaming insect cuisine. And I don't know if you could see, Jessica was on the panel as well, so always an honor to be anywhere with Dr. Ware. So our funding primarily comes from universities, museums, and institutions to fundamentally change our attitude towards eating insects. Our work helps to explain why the UN endorses edible insects to address food security and sustainability in their 2013 FAO report, which is Edible Insects: Future Prospects for Food and Feed Security. The FAO report endorses edible insects because of its great sustainability, nutrition, and potential to provide a livelihood. It takes a fraction of the resources to create an equivalent weight in insect protein as it does for traditional livestock. Insects also create just a fraction of greenhouse gas emissions compared to livestock. Nutrition-wise, edible insects are nutrient-dense, packed with both macronutrients and micronutrients like vitamins and minerals. And if you can believe it, crickets also amazingly have all 9 essential amino acids. And for those that don't know, amino acids are the building blocks that are required that we don't naturally produce ourselves, so things that we need to take. So FAO addresses why we should eat edible insects, and at Brooklyn Bugs, we answer how and make it digestible for the public. Our work is not only rooted in sustainability or environmentalism or gastronomy, but it's also about being inclusive and learning about new cultures and ideas. This Epicurious video, by the way, just hit 2 million views, so if you guys want to check it out, thank you. It's a 20-minute video of how to eat every edible insect. So we fearlessly cultivate innovation. We have the conviction to dream the impossible, and we celebrate diversity and the beauty of curiosity. We work interdisciplinarily to integrate the idea of eating insects culturally. We are so grateful for the interest our work continues to receive. Because people can fear what they don't know or understand. And if you see this anti-electricity cartoon, can you imagine if these ideas pervaded and if we lived today without electricity? So our approach is to transform fear through education, knowledge, empathy, and understanding. People tend to think in terms of extremes when it comes to edible insects. However, if even 10% of us ate edible insects just once a week, even that would have a tremendous impact on the environment. It's kind of a very similar concept to Meatless Mondays, if you will, and the impact that that has. It's a very similar idea with that. And if you eat insects, you are not alone. 80% of the world's nations and over 2 billion people regularly consume insects around the world. I wonder why that, oh, okay. There are over 2,000 species of edible insects with wildly different flavor profiles, textures, and functionality. Learning how to transform ento-based products into food we recognize will be key to mass adoption around the world. Now, have you ever thought about why eating mold, cheese, fungus, bacteria, fungus being mushrooms, bacteria, lactic fermentation, or even insect regurgitation, honey, is acceptable, but not edible insects, something that is specifically farmed or harvested for human consumption and processed at FDA-approved facilities? I have good news for you. I've been teaching classes, and what I've found is that edible insects can be incorporated into any meal, in any cuisine, in any type of food. And I am not kidding. I've probably now made at least a few hundred unique dishes utilizing insect protein, and I feel like I'm only at the tip of the iceberg, really. I've actually never found a dish that I have not been able to successfully incorporate some form of insect protein, either to replace the meat and substitute it, to use it in its functionality for baking, to add as a flavor profile, to add as an accent. We're really just learning so much about the potential of edible insects. And there are easy ways to incorporate it, like adding it, and a lot of times people imagine seeing it as a bug in a bowl full of that's cooked. But it's also easy to prepare it and bake it into breads and also make a compound butter like this black ant butter as well. With that challah bread, I also made this delicious sandwich, and where I also incorporated cricket hot sauce. And you could see there are tremendous layers that we could have here with cricket burgers and also the cricket hot sauce and the cricket buns as well. You could add it into various soups if you like, and add it as toppings. And if you like tempura, I mean, who doesn't like fried foods? You could add cricket powder into your tempura. And for sushi lovers out there, I love making the cicada sushi. And cicada nip ramp cricket powder kimchi. So I'm just trying to give you an idea that there's really the only limitation we have with cooking with insects is our own imagination. And for those of you that might be more tempted with the idea of sweet foods, of course we could incorporate insects into desserts like this black ant cricket matcha tiramisu. One of the great things that we found is that humans are curious by nature, and regardless of if you're for or against eating insects, it definitely sparks people's curiosity. And I don't know how many of you guys may be familiar with the Brood X or Brood 10 cicada emergence that happened last year. But as a result of that, my colleagues, Jessica was in the news like every other day, and I happen to be in a lot of the news as well around the cicada emergence. And there were global features not only in how to eat insects, but why we should eat them as well. And a lot of people view this as a sort of a watershed moment in raising a lot of awareness and appreciation around eating insects. This moment right now presents a unique opportunity for you to be a part of this movement. I emphatically love to share that your lifestyle choices and day-to-day actions can make a huge impact on the environment and in the world. I think all too often, especially at college presentations and with college students, they think, oh, my vote doesn't matter, what I wear doesn't matter, what I eat doesn't matter, and I emphatically like to disagree and empower them to believe that your lifestyle choices can and do make a difference. So I'm very grateful for this opportunity to share our work with you at the New York Public Library, because we are literally in the midst of transforming a global generational mindset around eating insects. We're trying to solve the puzzle and create a rubric for the global acceptance of edible insects. And we're receiving a tremendous amount of support and validation as we disrupt the system, raise questions, and present solutions. We're so grateful for all the grants, residencies, and presentations that we've been able to receive over the years. And we encourage everyone to join the movement. This isn't just for foodies or chefs, but we really need students, teachers, anthropologists, chefs, policymakers, engineers, everyone to be a part. We recently were invited to give a presentation at 4-H's National Youth Summit for Agri-Science. And I'm very proud to say that we also begun our work with New York City's Department of Education. Dr. Ware, I actually want to speak with you separately about this new development that I want to bring you in on. No pressure. And recently, I've just been so honored that the work that I've been doing around eating insects has led me to be the culinary director for the Future of Food at South by Southwest. Also to be the culinary director for the Insects That Feed the World conference that's going to be in Quebec City from June 12th to 18th. And as a culinary advisor for the Methuselah Foundation in support of NASA's Deep Space Food Challenge. I mean, what an honor to be able to work with NASA because of my work around eating insects. And tomorrow, I'm going to be making the official announcement about my partnership with the UN's International Fund for Agricultural Development and with their program, Recipes for Change. And so my work with edible insects has led me to believe that anything is possible. I'm not guaranteeing that is exactly how you will feel by regularly eating insects, but I welcome you all to join me in trying one bug at a time. So a big congratulations to Peter Kuper on this exhibit at INterSECTS, and really a big thank you to Peter, the New York Public Library, and all of you for being here. My name is Chef Joseph Yoon. Please feel free to reach out to me at Brooklyn Bugs, and we're gonna now move on to the Q&A portion up on stage. Thank you all very much.
Okay, well, this is such a serious honor. I'm going to try not to cry immediately. It's just so great to, well, just talk about insects and share this love that we have. I have some questions here. I also have some of my own questions. Just to follow through on your talk, Joseph. Sorry. Yes, sorry about that. So why do you think, so 2 billion people eat insects. why do you think the West completely fell out of that? Was it like an Ice Age thing that insects stopped being, and anybody jump in on this as well, but it's just one of the curiosities because so many people do eat insects around the world. Why did we in the West suddenly go, ew?
What? Hello? There's a period during colonization where the idea of eating insects were portrayed as a savage cultural stigma, where it's like, oh, look at the savages are eating the insects. We're better than them, so we're not going to eat them. And generally, people that lived closer to the equator were more likely to rely on the consumption of insects because they were a plentiful food source year-round. One of the big changes that we're trying to make is what Jessica and Elena both were talking about, I think, is it changing the perception of insects from pests, from being something that bites you or that you don't like, and to really place a great value on insects. And I think that's something that I am honored to feel like that all of us collectively share with our work around insects.
So I probably get to speak on this topic that's his expertise, but I think in Western preparations of food, a lot of times we don't have the face on the organism, and with several preparations of insects, you see the whole thing. And just when I've talked about entomophagy in my classes, students have said, well, I don't want to eat the whole bug. So with preparations like Chef Joseph is making with the breads and the flours, and I think that's really shifting that perception.
Well, how do your students feel about lobster?
Right. So that's what I say. They'll eat they'll drink tequila with the worm in it for sure.
Those make things better.
So another, this is a big question. How can we help insects here in New York City? Jessica, perhaps you can answer. You can answer in New Jersey too.
Well, I think that there's nothing that you can't do. So that's what I would say. There's probably a lot of things, even in your day-to-day, that would have a pretty tremendous impact. From having, if all you have is a fire escape or a window that you have open, you can have flowers that have food and nectar that are useful for your plants. You can encourage your building or your neighbors to keep their lights off so that you can have less light pollution, because that's a really important way that fireflies and things like that use communication, flashing signals at night, light pollution can actually be a loss of habitat for them if things are too bright. And then beyond what the individual choices are that you might make, you can make decisions on who you vote for. You can make decisions by writing letters to your council people. You can write letters to your mayor. You can write letters and encourage people who are in decision-making positions to do advocacy, to make decisions about green space, make decisions about land use, make decisions about pesticide use. David Wagner from the University of Connecticut calls insect decline death by 1,000 cuts. So it's not that there's one solution where, if we all just did this, the solution, that we'd have a solution. Insects are being bombarded by lots of different things that are impacting them negatively. So there's lots of different ways that you can have the impact on saving them.
So Elena, related to that, why are moths attracted to light?
The question I always get. But yeah, no, thank you. So I like to say we'll never know, because the unfortunate truth of animal behaviors, you can't ask them. But the best hypotheses that we have are that, like a lot of organisms, they navigate by the full moon, which is, in a natural setting, that's going to be the brightest light in the sky. But when we have artificial light, we create a fake brightest light in the sky, and they get confused. And so they fly to that instead, and you notice that if you spent a lot of time in front of insect lights like I have, they often fly in circles around it. And so they've sort of lost their way. And then eventually, unfortunately, it causes them to go into their daytime. If it's bright enough, it'll cause them to go into their daytime sort of sleep mode. And they'll be resting maybe on the side of your house or the side of a sheet. And that opens them up to predation, unfortunately.
While I have you, do you know there are other examples of medicines that have been sourced from insects? I just kind of stumbled upon entomotherapy, and I was like, entomotherapy, okay. And when I looked it up, I saw very little about that in terms of papers and things. And that's a huge area of like medicine that we can get from, people use ants against arthritis, for example, and
bees as well.
And bees.
So with the exception of people, taking the propolis and the bee pollen, I actually don't know if Jessica or Joseph knows any. I'd be happy to hear it. And, maybe any of us could get our second PhDs.
Well, it does suggest that there's this enormous area where we know so little about insects, and as you said, there's potentially 30 million species. Mm-hmm. That's an insane number, and so that means that we don't know. I mean, the cure for cancer could be just sitting there,
absolutely,
for flying by.
And I think we should expand our umbrella to include all of arthropods, because if we include all of arthropods, spider silk is non-reactive, and they often use spiders. Well, they're starting to use spider silk as a deliverable, so that you can put medicine actually injected into bodies using spider silk, and the human body doesn't react to it. Cheryl Hayashi at the American I only know this because Cheryl Hayashi at the American Museum, come visit us. She has a bunch of black widows upstairs that are alive, and she's studying their spider silk.
That does jog my memory. Spider silk is being used as a artificial ligament and tendon replacement with very low odds of rejection, because there's no antibody match needed. And spider silk is also the biomodel for Kevlar, which is obviously not a medicine, but for bulletproof vests.
Mm-hmm. I actually just got a lot of literature on Chinese medicine that includes insects, but it's all written in Chinese, and so I'm trying to find someone that will help me to translate it. But black ants have formic acid, and so it gives it like a sort of a zesty, citrusy sort of flavor. And it's purportedly good for your virility, for any of those that may be interested.
Well, speaking of that, there's a question. How do you kill the insects in order to prepare them for eating?
I'm
sorry.
She went side talk.
Oh.
Could you repeat that, please?
Yeah. Stop side talking. How do you kill the insects in order to prepare them for eating?
Oh, yeah. So the euthanization is usually largely done by freezing. And because of the neurobiology of the insects, they literally just kind of gently go to sleep through the freezing process.
So here's kind of a big question. So insects don't have a cerebral cortex. Do you think that they have a consciousness, and do they dream? Do they experience passion? And I mean, we know they're into sex. That's clear. That's pretty much all the sounds and everything that you're hearing. Bliss, love. Any thoughts on that?
That's a good question. I mean, I've certainly seen a dragonfly they do interception-style predation, just like lions bite. So they will look at where a fly is going to be, and they'll go to where the fly is going to be in 10 seconds and catch it. And when you look at it, sure, I can anthropomorphize them a bit. I can look at them and think, you feel success. You caught that fly, and you feel success, and you're enjoying it. But it's really hard to know. They have, I mean, for dragonflies, they have very few neurons actually in their brain. So it's hard for me to imagine that they would really have complex feelings. But they certainly can make decisions. We used to think the insects were very hardwired and that they just kind of followed certain pre-programmed pathways. Now we know that insects do actually make a lot of decisions, and there is a lot of choice in their daily behavior. But whether or not the dragonfly that I see catching a fly actually enjoys that sense of success, I don't know.
Probably just survival's working very well. What's Elena? What's the difference between moths and butterflies?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and so I like to say, speaking taxonomically, there's not an actual taxonomic difference between these things in scientific terms, but it just sort of speaks to our need to classify what we see, and that's fine. And so if you're looking at an insect and you want to know if it's a moth or a butterfly, there's a couple things you could look for. Butterflies have club-tipped antennae, so the antenna ends in a little bulb. Moth antennae are pretty variable. They can be straight and we call filiform, or they can be what we call pectinate, which if you've seen a male moth that looks like it has giant bunny ears, those are the antennae that have pheromone receptors for sensing females. The way that they sit at rest, the way that they hold their wings, butterflies tend to fold them sort of upright. Sometimes they have them flat, but moth wings are either tented, sort of crossed over each other. Sometimes they're rolled up in a tube, and sometimes they're sort of like flat against a surface, the way on my shirt. And then all butterflies are diurnal. So all butterflies fly during the daytime, and moths, most of them are nocturnal, but there are a few diurnal ones. So if you're seeing it at night, it's more than likely a moth.
And it's correct that moths came from butterflies or vice versa? How did that go evolutionarily?
So moths are older. I'm going to talk about phylogeny in front of an expert. Moths are older, and so there's the moth. Lepidoptera evolved about 250 million years ago. Thank you. And so there's a clade that's moths, and then a clade within that that's butterflies, sort of newer, and then another clade that we consider moths.
What's a clade?
Evolutionarily related group of species with a common ancestor at some point.
Great. Jessica, how do flies pollinate?
They pollinate just the same way as a lot of insects. They land on the plants, they're drinking the sugary nectar, they're eating pollen, they're dabbing. There's lots of different flies, I should say. Wait, first of all, let's take a step back. There's a lot of flies, and they do things differently depending on the family that you're talking about of flies. So some flies have kind of sucking and dabbing mouth parts. Some flies have drinking. Mosquitoes, male mosquitoes actually have like a little siphon, like a straw, and they suck nectar. Other flies are kind of dabbing. Others have kind of shoveling and chewing mouth parts. So depending on the fly group that you're talking about, they will be consuming different parts of the pollen or the nectar that the plant has. And as they fly from plant to plant, just as bees do, they are kind of carrying the pollen with them. And a fun thing to do is play the game, is it a bee or is it a fly? All entomologists love to play this game. So whenever you see an article in the New York Times or in any magazine or
The cover of some books
the cover
about
of some
bees.
book about bees, then you will look closely, and more often than not, actually, it's a fly. It's a syrphid fly that's on the cover and not a bee.
Way.
So
Yes
the
way.
game we play is it a bee or is it a moth?
This is sort of a broad question. Why are some insects so beautiful, dragonflies, butterflies, and others, for many, so creepy and scream-inducing? What properties make for one or the other? Have human beings historically always reacted negatively to some insects?
Well, creepy is a matter of opinion.
I think that I really appreciated how both of you spoke about changing perceptions. And I think that as we place more value on insects, and it's like, wow, silk comes from insects? I mean, do people even realize and appreciate some of these things, that the lipstick that you're wearing probably has carmine in it? And well, if it's red colored. And as we continue to change these perceptions and increase the value, I think that there's a certain beauty in that. Or maybe for humanity, it's like a greed that we see or something. But I find like this just like incredible beauty in the insects. And the more and more I work and learn about them, the more beauty I see in them. And I think that familiarity breeds this appreciation. And the more that you learn about, like you could see this like abstract art and be like, what is that? It just looks like a big splatter of paint. But then the more you learn about it, it's like, oh wow, you have a greater appreciation. And so I think that the work that we're all collectively doing will hopefully give people a new idea and appreciation for insects as a whole.
Go Jackson Pollock. Are there any groups working to regulate lawns in the United States?
Well, there is a group that's a large insect organization called Entomological Society of America, and they have this project. It's not they're not necessarily regulating lawns. They don't have the authority to do so. I'm not authorized to say that they're authorized to do that, but they do have a group that is working to try and advertise why you should get rid of your lawn, and it's called like the removing of lawns in America, and they're really trying to encourage people to turn all of their lawns into pastures, into meadows, into tall or short grass prairies. So I know lots of insect groups that are really working towards it, but the difficult part is that we, as I think a couple people mentioned it earlier, we view lawns as being a status symbol, right? So people who could afford to have a lawn that wasn't agriculture were usually wealthy. That stuck in our head, right? The way that lawns were created in North America really also had to do with class and kind of your socioeconomic status. So we've got that stuck in our head that if we want to compete with the Joneses, we need to have a perfect green lawn. In my town, if you don't have a perfect green lawn, people tell you about it, I promise you.
Oh, they sure do?
Yeah. but we need to change that. That's what we need to change, absolutely.
I mean, the pictures that you showed of the two lawns, it was like so clearly the one that was going to be a great habitat for insects looked gorgeous. And I mean, I think that's a general perception change that many of us are going through now, is in general seeing nature and going, oh, wait, I don't want you to go away, and better if, there's a lot more of it around.
Yeah.
To get into a little bit of finger pointing with things like neonicotinoids, is it Bayer, Monsanto, these companies that are promoting these things, and I've watched many a documentary where they're up there happy to say, oh, it really doesn't do anything. Monoculture, like just growing one kind of plant. It's in fact, for farmers, a better thing if they surround, say, the rim of their farms with wildlife, because you need wild bees and you need the wild insects to keep it from actually the very thing that they're using pesticides to prevent. So, but I think it's important for people to know that there are corporations that are actually promoting this and have promoted it really hard. I mean, I forget where you were talking about, where you said somebody came to your door and was like saying, we can spray your lawn. And you were like, I'm an entomologist. And he went, okay, see ya.
When I say that, they say, what's an entomologist?
Yeah.
And yes, I get that every day. And you look like you could use some help here with this property. Like, no, I don't. Looks exactly how I want. Right. It's exactly how I want it to look.
But I think it's just important for people to know about these. And one of the things that I read was that literally they're coming up with names for these products that are hard to pronounce, so that we cannot get a handle on them. So like neonics, okay, we got that maybe, but that there's a lot of products that are being put out there that are essentially DDT, which is what was Rachel Carson was waving her arms around in the early 60s that had a tremendous impact on making that go away. So I'm doing an audience question. Like, what can we do to like hit up these companies and make them be less profitable, but maybe more survivable?
Well, so I would say that one of the issues is that we're competing with insects in a way for the same resource, right? We want corn, they want the corn to eat. We want grain, they want the grain to eat. We want to have tomatoes, they want to eat the tomatoes. So we're competing with them for this resource. And food security is one of the missions, of a lot of entomologists. A lot of people who are entomologists, their whole mission is to stop vector-borne illness and to ensure food security. And one of the ways that they can ensure food security, we think of like a couple of years ago, there was a really huge locust outbreak. In parts of Africa, where people lost their crops, they lost their food, and there was imminent starvation that people were worried about. And in those cases, it's hard to say, well, gee, maybe that would be a good instance where using insecticides or using integrated pest management, which is where we use insecticides as the last possible resource, but we try biological control. We use insects that can actually eat other insects, or parasitoids, which can parasitize insects. We can use biological control as a method first, and then as a last resort, like in the case of that locust outbreak, where people are actually going to starve, then we could apply insecticides. There are companies that really focus on that, integrated pest management, where they're using this kind of multi-tier approach, assess, design your crops, like you're just saying, with trap crops around the edge that kind of draw pests out, using biological control, and then at the last possible resort, using insecticides. Not all companies do that. So how do we do that? That again goes back to your decision making, right? So you have decisions on who you vote for. You have decisions on how you use your voice, and we can speak out, right? We can speak out to our council people. We can speak out to what the school is spraying on the lawn in your local school. We can make decisions on who we vote for.
A functional ecosystem is the best defense.
Mm-hmm. That sounds like a really great note to end on. So yeah, I hope all of you will go out there and now be embracing insects and thinking about how we can interact with them in a positive way that works for all of us. And I want to thank all of you so much for being here, and thanks for all of you for coming out tonight and getting past the lions and all that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.